G'day, it's Paul Rowe. I'm on an Outback Historian road trip, and I thought I'd stop for a minute just to talk to you a little bit about worldview. N.T. Wright says there are sort of four elements to it. There's the stories we tell one another, there's the questions we have in life, there's the symbols we use to sort of explain the world around us, and then there's kind of the praxis, the everyday things we do. And our worldview is the kind of lens we look at through to look at life, and those things shape us. Well, I thought today I'd stop here in Gundagai of all places. Behind me is the Murrumbidgee River, and you can see the new road over there. I think you've probably heard of the road to Gundagai. A lot of people had in my generation. We grew up singing, on the road to Gundagai. There's a track winding back to an old-fashioned shack along the road to Gundagai. Mum and Dad are waiting for me, my pals, I'm going home. And that song became very, very popular during the 20s and 30s. It was written by a popular songwriter called Jack O'Hagan. Interestingly, he thought, writing songs about Australia isn't going to wash here in the early 1920s. So he wrote a song about America, and he sent it to the publisher, and they sent it back and said, no, we want songs about Australia. So he wrote The Road to Gundagai. And it became extremely popular because of radio, because it was introducing the serial Dad and Dave, which was extremely popular. So it's sort of the road to Gundagai somehow embedded itself in our culture and thinking as kind of a symbol of home. And it's a good way to explain how a place most of us perhaps never visit or even think of visiting, but it can take on a bigger meaning because it sort of symbolises, or it tells us stories about things that we value, about being home, being with Mum and Dad, with friends. And that's the first chapter. A bit further along, I'm going to tell you another part of this story, so come with me and we'll tell you the story of the dog on the tucker box. Well, you might ask, has the dog on the tucker box story lost its clout? Well, if you look behind, you'll see hundreds of school kids here, busloads of them visiting this little shrine, this little symbol. Frank Rasconi was a sculptor in this town in Gundagai who designed and built the plinth out of marble, and it's sort of become a signature on the highway that goes past here, that people pull up on the road to Gundagai, and there's the dog on the tucker box, the symbol of the faithful hound. Well, it comes back from way back in the 1800s with a bullocky that was going through here, got bogged in the creek, end of a frustrating day, found the dog sitting on his tucker box, and that sort of killed it for him. Well, that grew into the larger myth, if you like, of there's the loyalty of a dog to his master and the way they helped people get on in tough times. Well, they're the sort of symbols we sort of find, and we build a story around it, a myth, if you like, and sometimes it answers some of the questions about who are we and what really matters to us, like loyalty, like courage, like sticking together. And that becomes part of the praxis. And here we are, we've got kids here, and as I notice, a lot of these kids are new, obviously from immigrant families who've come to Australia now, are learning the story of the dog on the tucker box from nearly 150 years ago. So it's alive, and we're going to go into town and hear the story of Frank Rasconi, who designed and built the plinth and the dog, and an amazing sculpture that he created in there, and what he gave to Australia. Frank Rasconi was born in Australia, near Braidwood, eventually went back to Italy or Switzerland, which was his native place, went to Italy to study how to be a sculptor, came back to Australia, brought those gifts here, ended up in Gundagai of all places, and he wanted to prove to Australia and the world that Australian marble could match anything in the world. So he set about making this astonishing model here, nearly a metre tall, 20 different kinds of marble from New South Wales, 20,000 plus pieces, over 28 years working at night with handmade tools, things that he had himself. It's an expression of a bloke with a love for his trade as a craftsman, and it's pretty inspirational. So he built the plinth and designed the dog on the tucker box out there, which became a symbol for Australia. But here's another different kind of symbol. His love for his Catholic Church and his expression of his worship, I think, in terms of marble and his art, just like Michelangelo making those Pietas and things. Well, this, in a minor sense, he's doing the same thing here. He did it other places as well around Australia. And if you go up to a little town called Geelong, you'll find two extraordinary graves with beautiful carvings. We'll show you some pictures. But on there are two girls on each side of the grave expressing faith and hope. And I think Frank Rusconi was a Christian man in the sense that he had a belief in Christ. He loved his church, and faith and hope were sort of central to his life. And these beautiful things that he made tell us a story, another set of symbols that sort of answer questions about what's important in life and how can you use your gifts and how can you make something special for Australia to tell something of our story. So I think Frank Rusconi, he deserves the plaudit, of Australia to say thanks for putting your gifts to work for us. About 100 years ago, a fellow called Vance Palmer said about Australia, he said, we didn't feel at home in the place we'd arrived in until we people it with myths, tell stories, repeat those stories till they become part of us, make ourselves feel comfortable. Well, part of the storytelling you can see behind me is the serial Dad and Dave, which was a very popular radio serial, particularly in the 1930s, and the song The Road to Gundagai was part of that as well. So when the Anzacs went away to the Second World War, those kind of images went with them, and singing The Road to Gundagai brought back a lot of memories about home, about family, a bit like the White Cliffs of Dover did for the Brits, So I'm trying to say how our worldviews get shaped by the stories we tell one another, the symbols we collect, and I think sometimes when we visit the actual place where those stories have come, it helps us kind of affirm things about ourselves and about who we are as Australians. So I hope you've learned a little bit about worldview as we've travelled around this little town of Gundagai and heard the story of Frank Rusconi, the dog on the tucker box, Dad and Dave, and the songs of On the Road to Gundagai. Well, we're going to head off on the road again. I'm going to finish my ice cream. We'll catch you down the track. I'm Paul Rowe, the Outback Historian.